Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Whoa, take it easy, sweetheart.
Even for the critics of the Batman, there has been one aspect to this movie that has received almost universal praise. That being Colin Farrell's portrayal of the Penguin. And now it's been officially announced that he will be receiving his own spin-off series on HBO Max. Now this is a very slippery slope to be on because the market could very easily become oversaturated with Batman content. We know that once Hollywood finds something that they believe a lot of people like, that they will double and triple down on that idea until people like myself start to tune out.
I don't care!
But I will say this, I do think the character of the Penguin, as he is portrayed in the Batman, does have potential. And maybe this version of Penguin has more potential than almost any other version of the character I've ever seen. The way that his character is set up in the movie sets up a lot of possibilities as it pertains to telling a good story.
No shit.
Just an FYI, in the near future, I plan to do more videos like this, like I did with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel that I would have liked to see, because it gives me the opportunity to get my creative juices flowing. And who knows, maybe my version will end up being better than the version we actually get, and then I can brag about it.
You snotty little bastard.
Anyway, this is what my version of the Penguin streaming series would look like. So it's been reported that this show will focus on Penguin's rise through the ranks in the Gotham underworld. And to me, you can't show that rise without showing where he came from. My Penguin series would have a very similar tone to your classic gangster films, like Scarface or Goodfellas. People are always intrigued by the coming from nothing and making yourself into something aspect of these stories. So obviously my version of the series would include flashbacks. And I like the idea of jumping back and forth throughout the series, much like they do in Godfather 2, and showing things in Oswald's past that coincide with how he deals with things in the present. And I would take a lot of inspiration from the Silver Age version of his character, or at least the origins of that character. Because to me that makes the most sense with the story that I'm trying to tell. Again, coming from nothing and turning yourself into something. I could see Oswald as a bullied kid for his unusual appearance. His family is low income. He could maybe even be a child of a single parent household. And if that's too close to the Joker movie, we could have his father in it, but maybe on his deathbed like he is in the comics. Maybe also, like in the comics, his parents own some kind of small business. The most obvious choice would be a pet store that is probably failing financially. But this place is the source of where Oswald's love of birds comes from. And that's something that wasn't really addressed in the movie, but I think it would be a cool way to tie him back into the original versions of the character and make a legitimate reason for why he takes on the moniker of the Penguin in the first place. And I think early on in his life, Oswald sees a potential in a life of crime, especially when his family-owned business goes completely bankrupt and he eventually becomes an orphaned child. Which would do two things. One, it would play into the orphan theme set up in the Batman because both Bruce Wayne and the Riddler are said to be orphans. Gotham City may be a city of orphans, and that may play into why it ends up being the way that it does. A lack of guidance can do a strange thing to a child, and that is the one benefit that a Bruce Wayne has because he still has Alfred. But this would also make my version of Oswald start to look for some kind of father figure. And he would find that father figure in Vincent Falcone, who is the father of Carmine Falcone. Maybe Vincent has an interaction with Oswald at some point and he sees potential in a young kid like him and starts to groom him to be a part of his family operation. The story would feature a younger version of Carmine also, possibly befriending Oswald and maybe even having a little bit of animosity towards him for how his father feels about Oswald. And throughout the course of the show, we would see Oswald's gradual rise through the ranks ranks, as he is asked to perform certain evil deeds on behalf of the Falcone family. I would also have a lot of interactions with the Maroni family, just for a bit of world building considering what was set up in the Batman. Maybe we even see that moment that was discussed in the Batman, where Carmine is operated on by Thomas Wayne. There would be time jumps within my flashback so we could cover different points in his backstory. As far as the modern timeline for this series, I'd like to see this. I could very much see a show built around the power struggle for that now vacant #1 spot. It would basically be everything that the Boba Fett show was not. Based on Penguin's final appearance in the movie where he's sitting in a chair and looking over Gotham, and you kind of get these "the world is yours" vibes from him. He knows that this is his opportunity to seize power and possibly become the underworld kingpin of Gotham. But I can imagine that other people may be thinking the same thing as well. So that's where his conflict comes in for this show. I found a lot of inspiration for my story from the classic Batman Long Halloween story in the comics. It's gang warfare at this point. We have different families and different factions jockeying for position. And we have Falcone's children stepping up and trying to take their father's spot, and probably getting support from a lot of people in doing that. This puts Penguin in a difficult spot and forces him to kind of go out on his own and start his own family. And the center of all of his operations would of course be the Iceberg Lounge. I would have Carmine's children, Sophia, Alberto, and Mario, all be a part of this story. Sophia, of course, becomes the boss. Alberto is kind of the Fredo black sheep of the family who gets overlooked. And Mario wants to legitimize the Falcone family. So I believe that they would be very good antagonists for this Penguin story. I don't know how deep we can go here, but considering this is taking place in my perfect scenario, I would have hints of the Holiday Killer as well, which is of course Alberto Falcone's alter ego. And we would hear stories throughout the series about gangland members being brutally murdered. Just a personal note for me, I wouldn't mind seeing a character like the Ventriloquist make an appearance in this series as well. I've always felt that he deserved a proper adaptation in live action, and he would seemingly fit into the gangster motif and be a part of the power struggle in the show as well. After the events of the Batman, we have a vacant spot in Gotham's DA position. So I would also introduce Gotham's new DA, that being Harvey Dent. And this would also make things very difficult for these warring crime families. Because as we all know, Harvey Dent kind of starts out as a Boy Scout, so he would want to make his mark and he would be going after these families in order to make a name for himself. Just on a side note, I probably wouldn't feature Batman in this series at all. He would be talked about like you would have gangland members talking about how he's disrupting certain operations, but I would keep him in the shadows for the most part and keep most of the focus on the Penguin. And it's going to be more about how he navigates the chaotic state of the Gotham underworld. This show would be based upon the animosity between Sophia and Oswald. I think it makes it more personal because Oswald was the surrogate son of her grandfather, so I could see it coming down to a confrontation between those two. And this comes after Sophia kills her own brother Alberto out of disappointment. And similar to your Tony Montana's or your Michael Corleone's, killing someone close to her is the start of her downfall and she kind of starts to unravel. And that's when Penguin seizes the opportunity, takes advantage of her, and eventually kills her and becomes the boss. As with any gangster movie, I can imagine that the audience would be pulling for Oswald to a certain degree, not because he's a good guy, but because he's so charismatic and we know where he came from. And there's a part of us that want to see him succeed. But also, as with any good gangster story, if we show their success, we kind of have to show their downfall as well. There has to be consequences for what he does to make it feel real. So what if, once he finally seizes power, he is also, shortly after, arrested? Maybe for his connection with a crime we saw earlier in the series that comes back to haunt him. You could have this one thing kind of hanging over his head the whole time. I felt that Tony Soprano was always at his best when he was under duress, and he always felt like at any moment he could be put away for life. So I'm going to bring a little bit of that energy to the Penguin. It would be bittersweet to end the show that way, but I think it works for the story that I'm telling. One other thing I'd like to note is that the state of Gotham at the end of Batman would play in huge to this series. It could also add something visually to the show, with the flooded streets and Gotham in a rebuilding phase, and that creates a lot of opportunities also from a story perspective for some extortion from a organized crime perspective. So that would be the general idea around my Penguin series. Do you think it will end up being better or worse than the series we eventually get? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. Peace out.
Y'all be cool. Shut up.